So, Mr. Papantonio, what's going on this weekend on Free Speech TV with Ring of Fire?
We're going to talk about how Republican-controlled states are becoming cesspools of corruption and incompetence, and how, Tom, that's part of the plan. We take control of government state by state, county by county, judge by judge, city commissioner by city commissioner, and it all becomes this cesspool of corruption that has so much wind to the back that it's tough to stop. David Pakman is going to explain President Obama's proposal to provide 2 years of cost-free community college to American citizens, and what does that really mean? Does it really solve any of the problems? Brendan Fisher from the Center for Media and Democracy is going to give us the latest details on Scott Walker, on the John Doe investigation, and he'll tell us whether or not, interesting story. He's going to tell us whether or not Scott Walker can win on a national stage, even with all the barnacles. He's also going to talk about how this is not over. You've got Republicans and Democrats both going after Scott Walker because they realize that on the national stage he's going to be an embarrassment to himself.
I hear that, Pap, and I know the reality of that. But he's the guy that the Koch brothers have been supporting probably more than any other American politician over the last 5-6 years. And therefore, I think he's inevitable. I mean, George W. Bush had committed treason. He went AWOL during time of war for 14 months and never reported back. That's that's a hanging offense, and he became president of the United States.
It is, but you know what? At least there's a big difference between this guy Walker and Bush. Big difference. Here, look, you talk about the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers also came up with Sarah Palin. That was they're the ones that pushed McCain into Sarah Palin.
Really?
So simply, that
was Bill Kristol.
Well, let me just tell you something. It was all part of the whole Koch organization.
Wow.
McCain understood he needed money. That's where Sarah Palin was launched. But on our show, David Haynes is going to talk about the dangers of blood monitoring. This new system is called Alera in ratio, and it's very dangerous. It's going to talk about the overall failures of the FDA in recent years. The FDA knew for about 8 months that this system that people monitor their blood to see if it's too thick or too thin. They knew that it was a system that was not working. It was defective, and they had been told that 7 or 8 months they allowed the product to stay on the market anyway because of lobbying. They had people from Washington calling saying, the company decided to take it off of the market themselves, but there should be no mandatory recall. But it's just another picture of how dysfunctional the FDA has become and how medical devices and dangerous drugs, there's a rampant problem out there right now because we have an FDA that, it's funny, Tom, most people think that if a drug's on the market, that the FDA has tested it. The FDA does no testing, zero testing. So they completely rely on the drug company or the medical device company to tell them the truth. And we know from personal experience, having done this for 30 years where I go after pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies, that about as high as 80% of the time, we will find documents that are very specific about how are we going to cover up the truth, bad clinicals or whatever it is. So we got a good show lined up.
It sounds like it. I'm looking forward to it. Sunday noon Eastern time, and calibrate for the rest of the country. And of course, it replays every day right here on Free Speech TV. Mike Papantonio, Ring of Fire. Thank you, Pap.
Thank you, Tom.
It's always great to see you. We will be back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. Okay, yesterday I went off on this screed, and I want to kind of build on it. There are a few other things that I think are really consequential too that are going on in the world. For example, the Republicans are getting ready to go after food stamps. They've already set in motion a 19% cut in Social Security, and yes, the Republicans did that. In fact, they already voted on it. It's in the House rules now. And there are Democrats who are trying to stop that in its tracks, but the Republicans have set it up. Next is food stamps. It's hey, we don't need no stinking social safety net. And I want to get to this larger question of why do we even have a country or an economy? What are our values as Americans? Why do we allow companies to exist? Or do they allow us to exist? We'll get to that, but I wanted to start out with my riff yesterday about Iraq. I was suggesting at some length and in some detail that if we want to see the Middle East, if we want to see the Middle East end up being a rational place, working out, we need to help bring them into the modern age. And the way you do that is not by bombing people. You don't blow up their buildings and their power stations and their water treatment plants. You build hospitals and power stations and water treatment plants. You create the infrastructure of a modern society, and very often modernity follows. Not always, though. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, the UAE, these countries have all the infrastructure of the modern world, and Saudi Arabia has the fourth largest military budget in the world. But would you call them fully modern democracies? No, not a chance. These are dictatorial kingdoms run by dictators who we're in bed with, and they work on crony capitalism. Many of the enterprises are state-run, state-owned, or private-public partnerships. But the interesting thing, and Andrew Cockburn wrote a fascinating piece about this over at The Independent, that I want to share some pieces of this with you. Actually, before I get to that, let me set this up a little bit better. So Senator Sanders on this show a week ago, and I think 2 weeks ago, the last couple of times he's been on, he's been asked about Iraq. And I saw him yesterday on CNN as well talking about this, as I recall. And Senator Sanders is basically saying, I don't have a problem with us supporting a war against ISIS, with airstrikes and things. But it really needs to be Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar. It needs to be the countries in the region who are all run by multi-billionaire families with multiple billionaires and very, very rich countries with enormous resource bases, advanced and sophisticated military capabilities. It's up to those countries to fight this war in their region. If you want ISIS taken out, and you follow his logic, if you want ISIS taken out, you say to Saudi Arabia, good luck, guys. We'll back you up, but this is not our fight. Iraq and Syria, we're not talking Mexico here. There's no Monroe Doctrine. This is not our hemisphere even. It's not even our continent. This is yours. So you guys, put up the people, put up the money, put up the military equipment. We'll back you up. We'll replenish your military hardware. We'll even fly some strikes for you. We'll provide you with intelligence. There's a lot we can do to help. But Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, you guys get in there. Now, all that sounds so logical and so reasonable. And I absolutely agree with Senator Sanders on that. And let me tell you the rest of the story, to paraphrase Paul Harvey, the late, great Paul Harvey. Patrick Cockburn, in the Sunday, July 13, 2004. This was the middle of last summer. Wrote what probably is the least well-known story that should be the most well-known story in the history of journalism on the Middle East. He says, sometime before 9/11, Prince Bandar bin Sultan. Now, Prince Bandar was the Saudi ambassador to the United States. He had been the head of Saudi intelligence. In fact, was up until just a few months ago. He was such a close friend of the Bush family. He was always hanging out with George Sr. back in the day when George Sr. was running the CIA and was vice president, was president. And then he started hanging out with George W., holding hands, kissing, sleeping at the ranch, the whole bit. So anyhow, Prince Bandar bin Sultan had a revealing and ominous conversation with the head of the British Secret Intelligence Service, MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. Prince Bandar told him, quote, now keep in mind, this article was written 6 months ago. It's about a conversation that happened 2 years ago, or there a couple of years ago. Prince Bandar told the head of MI6, quote, the time is not far off in the Middle East, Richard, when it will be literally God help the Shia. More than 1 billion Sunnis have simply had enough of them. Now, there are Shia in the west of Saudi Arabia. The Assad government, Assad is an Alawite, which is sort of like from the Shia. The Iranians are Shia. There was a Shia takeover, basically, of Iraq when we turned it over to Maliki. And so what happened? Well, according to Andrew Cockburn, the Saudis financed this fighting force to take on the Shias in Syria and in Iraq. And that fighting force we call ISIS or ISIL.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann program. Call 202-536-2370.
So Prince Bandar and his buddies in Saudi Arabia and the rest of these Sunni billionaires in the region, they apparently funded ISIL. How are they going to fight it? Thom Hartmann here on the best of the rest of science and green news. You need to know this. The Environmental Protection Agency does a lot to keep us all safe from pollution. But one of their recent actions may go down in history as more important than the rest. Last week, the EPA delivered a letter to the State Department, and with it, that agency gave our president the cover to reject the Keystone XL pipeline. According to Cynthia Giles, the top enforcement official at the EPA, the tar sands oil that will flow through that pipeline represents a huge risk to our nation and our environment. Ms. Giles explained that these risks include, quote, a significant increase in greenhouse gas emissions, end quote, more potential spills, and a high likelihood that more tar sands oil would get burned. Right now, low oil prices discourage tar sands production, but the Keystone Pipeline would make it financially viable to extract this toxic sludge, even at lower prices. Making it easier to extract and refine tar sands means that more of it will be burned, and more of it being burned will contribute to global warming, and that's the biggest reason why President Obama needs to reject the Keystone XL. Back in 2013, President Obama said, quote, the net effects of the pipeline's impact on our climate will be absolutely critical to determining whether this project is allowed to go forward, end quote. If he stands by that statement, this new letter from the EPA should be all he needs to say no to TransCanada and their tar sands sludge. As Bill McKibben of 350.org explained, the president has all the nails he needs to finally close the lid on this particular boondoggle. Both houses of Congress have passed the controversial bill, so it's up to President Obama now to block Keystone from becoming reality. Hopefully, this EPA letter will help him to say no to this pipeline once and for all. Facebook knows what you look like. According to a new article in Science magazine, the social media site has software that is now as accurate as a human being at a few constrained facial recognition tasks. That system is called Deep Face, and Facebook claims they're using it to protect you, not to spy on you. They claim that once the system recognizes your face in any of the 400 million photos that users upload every day, you will be getting an alert from Facebook telling you that you appear in the picture. Computer scientist who directs the program says that you can then choose to blur out your face from the picture to protect your privacy. What wasn't explained, however, was whether or not there will be a digital record of your face in that picture and what happens when it's linked to a protest or a private event. Although we could try to restrict Facebook from developing or using such software, it would likely just pop up from another developer. Our government has spent a fortune developing similar software, and companies like Google are working on their own versions. This type of software may be here to stay, so we better figure out how to protect what's left of our privacy.